So if you really want to understand society that we're living in today, you have to understand Western thought. And you can't really understand Western thought unless you understand esotericism and occultism. It's part of our lives. It's around us. The people that are ruling us, people that have influence in culture and so on, they have these kind of thoughts. This is very widespread in liberal countries. This was widespread in socialism, in feminism. It was very widespread in Nazism.
Does Zionism itself have any connection with these kind of ideas and these cultures?
Yeah, this is a very broad topic and it's extremely interesting.
Welcome back to Incisive Thoughts. And today we have another groundbreaking topic, a very pressing topic that almost everyone has questions related to this topic. So we are going to address today something like the occult and atheism. And our today's guest is going to be very, very special because today we have Dr. Abdullah as-Sueidi. He's a Swedish convert to Islam with a PhD in Islamic theology, specializing in atheism and the study of Western esotericism. He has taught at the Prophet's Mosque and the Islamic University of Medina, and for more than 15 years has been active in Islamic education in Sweden. His research uncovers how occult and esoteric traditions, often hidden in the West, have shaped culture, politics, and even modern ideologies. Today, he, he helps Muslims understand these undercurrents and how to respond to them with both knowledge and faith. So it's an honor to invite Dr. Abdullah as-Sueidi to this platform. Welcome to Incisive Thoughts.
Jazakallah khair. Very thankful to be here. Just to correct, I've been doing dawah in Sweden for about 15 years. I've not been teaching in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ for 15 years. It was I've been teaching there for 3 years before,
Okay.
and I also taught in the Islamic University for 3 years, not for 15 years. So I've been active in dawah for 15 years. Yeah.
Oh, mashallah. But still, like, 15 years in Sweden and 3 years in the Prophet's Mosque, that's still great, alhamdulillah. Yeah, so today's topic, I think, is very pressing. So before we get into the topic, I think it's important to for our viewers to get to know your journey as an academic and also your journey into Islam. So you embraced Islam in Sweden and later specialized in theology and atheism. What drew you to study not only atheism but also the occult and esoteric traditions?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm from Sweden. I'm a convert. I come from an academic family, so both of my parents are doctors, and also like my grandfather was a professor in history, and a lot of my family are academics. So I had the interest in academia since I was young, and reading about different religions and different thoughts and so on, ideologies and so on. I converted when I was in second grade in high school, alhamdulillah. And then when I was 18, I left Sweden to study Arabic language and Islamic studies. And then I get accepted to the Islamic University in Medina, and I studied my bachelor's there first. And then when I get accepted to my master's, I wrote my master's about a person called Muhammad Asad, who translated the Quran to English. And he's a very interesting person, but he was influenced by the rationalistic school of thought. So that made me interested in rationalism and more interested in Western thought in general and so on, because I had to read about it a lot when I wrote my thesis. And then I wrote my PhD thesis about Western scholars' refutations on atheism. So one more time I had to work with these subjects and read about the history of Western thought and so on. And then I also study a bachelor's and a master's in religious studies from Sweden. So when I was studying that, I took courses about Western esotericism and occultism. So I started to specialize more and more, because I realized that if you really want to understand the world that we're living in today, you have to understand Western thought, because the Western world that I was brought up in is influenced, of course, by Western thought, but all of the world, more or less, is influenced by Western thought, because the Western countries colonized most of the world. So we can see that the education system and many of the journalists and many of the politicians that are living in Muslim countries and other countries in the world, they are influenced also by Western thought. So if you really want to understand society that we're living in today, you have to understand Western thought. And you can't really understand Western thought unless you understand esotericism and occultism. Because when you read just about famous philosophers and other scholars from the West, their thoughts, you will only see the open side of Western thought. But when you read about occultism and esotericism and secret societies and all these things, you will see the other side of Western thought that has been just as influential in many ways on the Western thought and the Western society and the world as a whole as the more open kind of philosophy and ideologies that we see today. So it made me more and more interested in reading about that. I would not really say that I'm a really expert when it comes to esotericism. I'm more an expert when it comes to atheism, but my interest in understanding Western thought led me to read a lot about Western esotericism and occultism and so on. And I can say, and I have to be honest from the beginning, that understanding esoteric thought is much harder than to understand the general ideologies that we read and we hear about, because usually the sources of these esoteric thoughts and these esoteric societies and so on are usually hidden. So you don't get all of the sources that they have. It's not the same thing when you read books on ideologies and so on. You could just take the book of the person who is promoting the ideology, you can read it and you can learn about it. But here, many of the books are hidden. You can't really read the books. And even if you read the books, usually you would not understand them unless you will have someone who is very in-depth, have an in-depth insight into these esoteric thoughts that can explain to you what they really mean, because many times it's very hard to understand what they really say. And also, one thing that is very problematic when it comes to these organizations and secret societies and so on is that they swear oaths that they cannot reveal what they are doing inside of their lodges or inside of their organizations and so on. So it's very hard to really know what's happening inside there. And if they say that, no, we don't do this, no, we do not do that, it's very hard to believe them, because they swear an oath that it's forbidden for them to say anything that happens inside there. So if they say, no, we don't do it, and I know that he swore an oath that if he was reveal what he did, what he does in there, then they say they will slit my throat and they will kill me and all of these things and so on. So of course it's not going to tell you the truth.
No.
So you have to rely on other kinds of sources than the sources that you rely upon when it comes to that it comes to reading open thoughts that you can see. So this is quite problematic. There is a scholarship or there are scholars that are specialized and really goes back to sources. And today it's much easier to get hold on documents than it was before. Now you can find many of the things on the internet. You can find many of the books that was hidden before. They're open now and all of these kind of things. So things are much easier today than it was before. But one problem that we have today is that many people that talk about these things, they are all into these conspiracies, conspiracy theories that are exaggerating these things. So when they are talking about these things, they are making like 1 + 1 = 35. So they have like 2 pieces of evidence and they try to make a whole puzzle of just 2 pieces. And that's also problematic. So there's a lot of noise out there. So if you really want to understand what's really going on here, then you have to focus and you have to have a good methodology in trying to go back to good sources, good scholars that can really understand these kind of things, and articles and books and other things that can give you a deeper understanding in these topics. Yeah.
Okay, subhanallah. So that was great. Now, the pressing question comes to mind is, how would you define in a very brief manner what would be the and esotericism? What would that be very briefly?
It's very important with definitions, and sometimes people are using terminology in a quite broad way, and sometimes they're using it in a very academic specific way. So occult really means something that is hidden, and there are usually like practices and ideas or knowledge that are intentionally concealed. So it can be things that are related to rituals, magic, mystical forces, and so on. This is what is occult, and it's very close to the word esoteric, which means inner knowledge. And that's the kind of knowledge that is reserved for an innate elite. So there are only specific numbers of people that can learn about that specific knowledge, and they usually learn about it when they do different rituals and they get initiated in societies. So that kind of knowledge is not open for everyone. That kind of knowledge, you can only gain that kind of knowledge when you step into different lodges or different organizations and you swear an oath, and they maybe they pick you, they say specifically you can join our organizations. And when you join the organization, you will not get all of the knowledge at the same time. You will go into the first step and you can learn some of the things. And then the second step, they can see, they watch you, they see that you're a person that can understand, you don't reveal their secrets and so on. Then you go to the second step and the third step and the fourth step and so on. So you will learn things step by step, and you swear an oath usually that you will not reveal what's happening inside of the organizations that they have. So esoteric is inner knowledge that is quite elitist, and it's not the same kind of knowledge that we usually gain when reading other kinds of books and so on. And to understand these things, because like I say, it's related to many concepts that was usually rejected knowledge, not the kind of knowledge that was accepted by the Catholic Church or the Islamic Society or the Islamic Ummah and so on. So we're talking about magic, we're talking about astrology, we're talking about divination and these kind of things that is not usually part of the tradition by the religious establishment. So we can see that these kind of things has very, very deep roots in history. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentions that when sorcery, magic came down to earth, it was in Babel. أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلْ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. So this is something that happened thousands of years ago. This is the roots of the magic that people are practicing today. Okay, it goes back to Babylon. That is maybe like talking about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago or something like that. So it's very, very old. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that in Egypt that Fir'aun used to have magicians with him. So they were practicing magic also. They were practicing magic in Babylon, and they were practicing magic in Egypt. And then the beginning of Western thought is usually connected to ancient Greece. And ancient Greece was not the Greece that we know today, the country that we know today. It was the Greek-speaking people that were living around the Mediterranean. So they were living in what we know today as Greece, and also in Turkey. They were living in Italy. They were living in later they were living in Egypt, and they were living in these countries. And many of them were influenced by these kind of thoughts, these kind of esoteric thoughts that originated in Babylon or in Egypt. So we can see, as an example, the Pythagorean school that developed during the 6th century BC. They had these kind of secretive initiations, and they took many of the thoughts that they had from Egypt. So there was kind of the emergence between Egypt thought and the kind of esoteric knowledge that they used to have over there with the Greek philosophy. And also, there was a famous person, or he was not really a real person, but someone it's attributed to a person called Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus. And this is something that's called Hermeticism, which became very influential in these esoteric thoughts. And this was also some kind of mergence between uh, belief in some of the Egyptian traditions and the Greek traditions that happened during the early period after Isa alayhi salam. And this had an influence of what's called Gnosticism, or they were at the same time what is called Gnosticism. And many of the early Christian churches or organizations or denominations were Gnostic denominations. So they had these Gnostic thoughts that were based on that they can get some kind of inner spiritual knowledge. And these were also esoteric societies. But what we know is that the Christian church, the Catholic church, became the dominant church. So the Gnostic societies, even though they merged the kind of knowledge from these esoteric thoughts and from the old Egyptian thoughts and so on, they merged them with Christianity. We know that many of these schools died out because the Catholic Church became the dominant church. So they suppressed the other kinds of churches, like the Gnostic churches and these kind of the different philosophies and esoteric thoughts that was widespread during the Hellenistic era in Greece, ancient Greece, and in the Roman Empire. And then the Catholic Church was dominant during the Middle Ages. And when the Renaissance came, we can mention something else during that period of time. During that period of time, Islam became dominant in these kind of areas, in Egypt, in Sham, and these other places where these kind of thoughts and esoteric thoughts were widespread. And when the Muslim ruled, they started to translate a lot of the books that were widespread in the Hellenistic era. So they translated books, and also they translated Persian books and Indian books and other kinds of books and so on. So they translated scientific books, technical books that benefited the Muslims, and they also translated philosophical books that had a huge impact on the aqidah of the Muslims when it comes to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and his attributes and qadr and so on. And they also translated many of the esoteric books. And this is the thing that is mentioned usually. Usually we hear about the books that was translated. Some of the books were good, they were in science, and some of the books were not good. They were in philosophy that had a bad impact on the aqidah of the Muslims. But usually we don't hear about the translation of the esoteric books. And these esoteric books had a huge impact on different movements inside of the Muslim world. So we can see like branches of Shiism, like Ismailism, and also some of the Sufi branches and so on. They were very influenced by these esoteric books. So they adopted these kind of thoughts in their tariqas or in their different organizations and so on. And they also translated books about magic, astrology, and these kind of things. They became very widespread in the Muslim world and also amongst Jews. And this was one of the reasons why Kabbalah became famous amongst the Jews. These were also translated books that influenced Jewish thought, the Jews that were living in the Muslim world. And then when the Christians took over Spain and took over different countries of the Muslims, they took many of the books that the Muslims had and they translated it to their languages, to Latin. So they took books in Arabic and they translated it to Latin. So many of these thoughts, esoteric thoughts, that were not widespread in Christian countries during the Middle Ages, now were translated to Latin from Arabic or from other languages in the Muslim world. So these kind of thoughts started to become prevalent one more time during the Renaissance. So during the Renaissance, they started to translate a lot of books from Arabic and from other languages to Latin and to other languages. So they translated books about science, about philosophy, but also these esoteric books. So one more time, these esoteric thoughts started to become widespread in Europe. So we had some of the scholars or famous thinkers during the Renaissance. They were impacted by esoteric thoughts, and they started to translate these books and started to promote these kind of ideas. And then it spread more and more around in Europe, and then it had an impact on many of the Enlightenment thinkers that laid the foundations for these isms that we might talk about later about, and also atheism and other things. Many of them, even though they're rationalists, and they say that we only believe in a rationalist way and so on, they were also members of secret societies or influenced by some of these esoteric thoughts. So it became widespread through different societies that they had in Europe during that period of time. Because of these books started to be translated one more time, the Hermetic books, the books of Kabbalah, and other kinds of books, esoteric books that started to become widespread in these different societies. And they were usually very opposed to church because they did not like the church. They think that the church, they suppressed them. They were against them. So they hated the church, and sometimes it came an expression that they were promoting secularism, sometimes there was atheism, sometimes it was other kind of criticism against the church in Europe. So this is a summary of the kind of ideas of esoteric thoughts. I don't want to go too much in depth because it can be hard to understand. I just want to give like a summary of how we can think about these things and how important it is for us to understand them, because it's part of our lives. It's around us. The people that are ruling us, people that have influence in culture and so on, they have these kind of thoughts. That there's a specific subject that you can study when you study about Western esotericism that is called Occulture. Yani how occultism has an impact on culture. So we can see that many of the books, poems, films, music videos, they have these kind of esoteric illusions in them to point to these kind of esoteric thoughts. And I think that as a Muslim, it's very important for us to see this, trying to study it from a scholarly point of view, but at the same time, it's also important for us to understand it from the Islamic worldview, because we know that shaitan will do everything to take people away from worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're created in this dunya to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to believe in Allah, to love Allah, to revere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to worship Him. So we know that shaitan will take all of the kinds of means that he can do to take people away from that. And we can see that in many of these societies, they are actually revering what they call Lucifer. And they say that they are Luciferianists. So they revere him. And I might talk about that later. I could take as an example. We have the one of the ruling parties in Sweden for most of the 20th century. It's the biggest party in Sweden, but it's not the ruling party in Sweden. The Social Democratic Party, their magazine or their paper that they used to give out was called Lucifer. It's the name of their paper. We can see Helena Blavatsky, one of the most influential people in occult circles, the Theosophical Society. Her magazine was called Lucifer. And we can see Albert Pike as an example, who is also a famous, one of the most famous Freemasons that ever lived, wrote his books, Morals and Dogmas. He mentioned allusions to Lucifer too. So from an Islamic point of view, it's very easy to see that there's some fishy things going on here. The Shaitan got his finger in these kind of societies and these organizations, and that is really trying to take people away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worshiping Allah azza wa jal, through these societies and through these practices that they have. So yeah, it can just take it as an example. If you write on Wikipedia, like a pact with the devil or a deal with the devil, just look at the list of the different songs in famous songs that mention that I made a deal with the devil, I made a deal with the devil, and I sold my soul to the devil, and so on. This is mentioned in films. This is mentioned in books. It's mentioned in music, and so on. We can see it all around us. So it's not that strange if you think about it, because you see, shaitan is in. It's very demonic. The culture that we see today. Allah Musta'an.
Mashallah, you covered a lot. I think most of my follow-up questions in your summary you covered, and it was a very good summary. What I would say is I'll just try to summarize what you said. So you first went into the Greek time, and you said that from that time itself, there has been this hidden knowledge, hidden societies or people or culture, something along the lines, which has been growing, and we can see it emerging maybe this side of the world, and then this side of the world, and then this side of the world. But that's always been there. And then you explained how the West, in fact, has been influenced by this, or has some element which are connected to this in some sense. So this actually exposes a completely new side of the West, which is like the hidden side of the West, as you mentioned. And I think this is very interesting for us in our discussion, when we are seeing that, okay, there is been an hidden side within the West. Uh, and then you mentioned how atheism and other isms can be connected to them, or can be influenced by them. So I think this will be a completely new line of perception, and seeing how these isms that we always try to critique using logic and philosophy and stuff like that, if we just try to see their genealogy and see where they are connected, I think it will expose something new about them. So I want to start with that first. So that is going to be very interesting. So when it comes to feminism, now we know feminism has impacted the world a lot. It has impacted our ummah a lot. Do we find any connection of feminism with these things?
Yeah, feminism and many other isms. We can find it in atheism. We can find it in socialism. We can find it in liberalism. We can find it in Nazism. We can find it in many different isms. But as an example, with feminism, the early feminists, they looked at religion as a way of upholding patriarchy. So they see that in the main religions in the world, there's a structure where men has usually higher power than women. So men are usually the imams and the rabbis, and they are the priests and so on. So they have these different positions, and they also have, like, they are more responsible in the family, and the women are in the traditionalist point of view. They should stay at home and take care of family and so on. So the early feminists, they wanted women to be liberated. They saw religion as something hindering these things. So some of the early feminists, they were talking about Shaitan, about Lucifer, that he was a rebel, and he was someone that rebelled against God. And also they were talking about the witches and witch hunt. They saw them as oppressed women that probably some of them were dealing with magic and dealing with these kind of esoteric things. They saw, like, oh, look at these oppressed women. Of course, some of them were really oppressed, yeah, we don't deny it, and some of them were killed and tortured and so on. But I'm talking about the way that they were looking at witches. They were usually dealing with esoteric things, occult things. The way that they were looking at Shaitan as a rebel against religion and so on. So this had an impact on many of the early feminists. There are some books that I've been reading about this subject. I don't remember the name right now, but that they had the illusions. There's a Swedish scholar that wrote a book about it, about Satanism in early feminism. But this was not something unique for feminists. And we can see it, that this was very prevalent in socialism too, because in the same way socialists, they saw religion as a way of upholding the social structures. So the church was usually aligned with the king, and then you had the noble under them and so on. So the church and the priests were usually saying to the common people, you should not do rebellion against the system, against the king. He is ordained by God and so on. So they were looking very critically at religion. And they saw also Shaitan as a rebel. And he was someone who rebelled against God. So you can see many of the allusions in early socialism, socialist movement, and also Karl Marx. He wrote some poems where he mentioned allusions to Shaitan. And you can see it in Bakunin, who was the famous promoter of anarchism. And like I mentioned, social democracy. And they had the newspaper or the paper called Lucifer. Some of them did not look at Shaitan as a real being that they worship. They looked at him as a symbol of rebellion. So they wanted to rebel. They wanted to rebel against the system. They wanted to rebel against the church, against religion. So they looked at Shaitan as a rebel that they wanted to follow. And like I mentioned, it's not just feminism, not just socialism. We can find it also many of the liberal societies today. Which societies do we think about when we think about liberal countries? Usually we think about 3 specific countries. We think about Britain, Great Britain, France, and United States. Great Britain was highly influenced by esoteric societies from the beginning. Freemasonry has been linked to the royal house in UK since ages, and has a huge impact on many of the thinkers and many of the high-ranking people and politicians and people in culture in UK. The same thing, the French Revolution. Many of the people that were behind the French Revolution were Freemasons. And we can see the Freemasonry in France, Grand Orient, is still very influential in France today. And they are very much behind the whole kind of secularization that they have in France. And we can see that many of the founders of United States were Freemasons and were into esoteric societies. And they had many illusions that can even see in the buildings that they have, many of the things that go back to Freemasonry and other kind of esoteric thoughts and so on. So this is very widespread in liberal countries. This was widespread in socialism, in feminism. It was very widespread in Nazism. In the days where Hitler ruled, the SS, Heinrich Himmler, he was very much into these kind of esoteric and occult practices. And the Thule society that was like kind of a foundation for the Nazi ideology was also very much into these kind of esoteric thoughts and so on. And it's quite interesting here to see that there's a famous historian called Yuval Noah Harari. He's an Israeli atheist, but he's very, very influential today. He got his books is usually promoting atheism in them, but he's quite interesting. Some of the analyses that he got are quite interesting. So what he mentioned is in one of his books, in Sapiens, that he said that during the modern period, the most influential religion in Europe was humanism, which is secularism. That you don't put belief in God in the center. You put belief in humans. The most important thing is the human, not belief in God and so on. So it's a form of secularism. And he said that this is the main religion, and this religion had 3 different sects: liberalism, fascism, and socialism. And these 3 sects were indulged in the most bloody war that the human race has ever seen, which is World War II. But what is interesting here is that he mentioned that it's one religion with 3 different sects. Okay. And all of these 3 different sects were highly influenced by esoteric and occult thought. So we see in liberal countries, Freemasonry and many of the different secret societies, and we see the Nazis that were influenced by esoteric practices, and early socialists were also influenced by esoteric thoughts. So you can't really understand modern West today if you don't you can't understand the isms if you don't understand esotericism. You don't understand the hidden driving forces behind these organizations and what they try to achieve. Of course, they have an open agenda, and that's important to understand. We have to understand liberalism, we have to understand communism, we have to understand Nazism and fascism and all these isms and feminism and so on. But we also have to understand the other part of it and the kind of thoughts that they were thinking about and had an impact on their whole thinking system and the ideologies that they have. Because sometimes they make these kind of allusions inside of their texts. You don't really understand what they mean, but they are mentioning something. There's that they make allusions to something else that is usually part of their esoteric thoughts and so on, and different symbols that they might have and so on. That is, if you don't really understand esotericism and Western esotericism, you can't really understand what they really mean and what they really try to promote.
Wow, that was really brilliant. I like, there's so much to think about and so much to talk about. So what you mentioned specifically, I think, was what I really enjoyed is that when we look at these founding fathers of many of these movements, they have connection with these hidden societies, and then we know some aspect of what goes on in those societies. So this is very interesting that, okay, what they are putting forward in front of the public and what they are popularizing, sometimes when they are part of those societies actually don't have those beliefs. I've heard this from you. Is that correct? Firstly,
Yes, exactly. As an example, we can take many of these secret societies. Let's take Freemasonry as an example. There are some, and Freemasonry is a general name, but there are different rites. So you have the Scottish rite, you have the Swedish rite, you have the rites in France, Grand Orient, and so on. But most of the Freemasonic, the Masonic rites do not allow women to join. Okay. And they are very hierarchical. So you have the leader, you swear allegiance to the leader, and you follow him and what he say, and so on. And the knowledge that you have in there is hidden and it's not open. At the same time, these people are claiming that they are democratic. And democratic means that people rule, not things that happens inside of secret societies behind closed doors and so on. This is not where things should be ruled. They say, oh, we don't get involved in politics and so on. But there are many studies that have been done that many of these politicians, they are really, and many of them are in the Masonic lodges and other kind of esoteric societies and so on, that it's very clear that they have to have some kind of agenda. And even though they might not discuss politics inside of the lodges, they are having these kind of connections and so on. We had some journalists in Sweden, as an example, they made studies about these topics in a specific place in Sweden. We can see that the opposite parties that are in the open, that are against one another, if they have two people that are both Freemasons, they will vote on the same thing because they are Freemasons and not because of what the politics says, the political party says. So there have been studies about these things, and people have been investigating in these things, and they haven't seen that it has an impact. So they say it's democratic, but at the same time, you swear allegiance to the Grand Master, and most people in society have no idea who's the Grand Master. Yeah, they haven't elected the Grand Master. And you swear allegiance to him. Okay, what you doing? What does he say to you? Does he give you an agenda? And you're a politician, you're a minister of the government, and you have a grand master you swore allegiance to. If he says to you that you should do this and this and that, do you obey him? Don't you obey him? I don't know. I can't really say for sure, but if I hear that a politician that is a minister of a government swear allegiance, and he said that I will follow what the Grand Master says, and I will obey him and so on, then of course we have to ask some questions here. So this is one thing. And also, they are driving people crazy, especially Muslims, when they say that Muslims, women and men, they're not praying at the same place, in the same place in the mosque, or the Muslims, they want women and men that they should not have the same swimming times in swimming places and so on. So women come for a specific time and so on. They say that this is so anti, I don't know, feminism or anti-egalitarian and so on. Okay, Habibi, you're sitting in a lodge. It's forbidden for women to enter the lodge that you're sitting in. Yeah, you shouldn't attack us. Women are praying in the mosque. It's no problem. They can come to a mosque. We just pray in different places. But and at the same time, you're in an organization that is forbidden for women to join. It's very hypocritical, But
Wow.
we can see this. It's secretive. It's not. They also claim that they are very rational. And they say that we have to go by our rational thought and so on. We should do what is rational, but esotericism, in its essence, it's not rational. It's not a rational thought. It's based on these occult practices. It's based on hidden agenda and swearing oaths and doing different rituals and so on. And these rituals are not rational. They are part of a tradition that you have. So claiming that you are rationalistic when you're at the same time in these secret organizations, it's the kind of thing that is very interesting to really understand of the West. They have these different sides. They have the hidden side, they have the open side. They are promoting for something and they're saying the other, they're doing the opposite at the same time. And it's really, I think, especially now during the war of Gaza, has really driven people crazy. They're saying, and we believe in human rights, and at the same time they're supporting killing of children, and we support children's rights, and they kill children over there. We support women's rights, and they kill women over there. Human rights, they kill human beings. We support animal rights, they kill animals. And this is so hypocritical, and it becomes so obvious to people that they have one agenda that is open, and they have this other agenda that they're going after. So I think this is something that we really have to look into more and learn about more to understand these kind of things.
I think what you just the topic that you just caught out, I think that is a very important point, because many times this element is missing within our discourses, and we don't know why the West sometimes we see behaves in a very hypocritical manner. I think this can explain some of these anomalies that we get. One thing, though, I want to touch on, which you specifically mentioned regarding this kind of rationalism that was promoted by them. I think within your talk with Brother Paul, you explained brilliantly, if I remember correctly, that many of these kind of scientific ideas that we have today, materialism, when we see who was responsible in spreading those ideas, sometimes we see that, okay, there has some links with these kind of societies where people were in public promoting rationalism, scientism, materialism, and all of these ideas, but they have these rituals, they have within their closed doors, they believe in something completely different. Is that something we can verify with some examples?
Yeah, we can take the whole Enlightenment project that was promoting rationalism and the scientific outlook and so on. Many of those Enlightenment project was based usually in mainly in France and UK, and many of those who were connected to the Enlightenment project, those who wrote the encyclopedia in France as an example, many of them were also in Masonic lodges, and the same thing in the UK. And we can see that they also had illusions when they wrote things like Denis Diderot, Baron de Holbach, and so on. They were famous for their atheism and rationalism, that they had these kind of illusions to some of the esoteric thoughts. It has not been it's not clear that Baron de Holbach or Denis Diderot were Masons themselves, but there are many people around them that were Masons, but that they were influenced by some of the esoteric thoughts. You can see someone as Percy Shelley, who's in UK, who wrote the book The Necessity of Atheism, which was one of the first books that was ever written in English language about atheism. I mean, it was maybe the first book. It was like in the beginning of the 19th century, and he was also a romantic writer, yani, of the genre of romanticism, and he has many of these esoteric illusions when he wrote. Even his wife, yani, she wrote the famous book about the Frankenstein monster. Has many of these illusions also to many of the esoteric. There are many esoteric thoughts in that book. As an example, yani, she is mentioning that the monster is born in Ingolstadt. Ingolstadt was the place where Adam Weishaupt started the Bavarian Illuminati, was born, and other things that is related to that book has many allusions to esoteric thoughts that has been mentioned. So, and she was married to Percy, who was the author of maybe one of the first books about atheism, who was himself had these different thoughts in his books. So yeah, this was something that was quite widespread. Yeah.
Wow, that is a very interesting point to note, is that, you know, when we look at atheism and rationalism and scientism, thinking as if they like, you know, independently just developed because people are doing research or something, but no, they hidden or could have some hidden elements of some secret societies that are involved in this. This is very important, I think, to note. I was reading this particular book, I think, we can, yeah, so this was by Josephson Storm, and and this made some brilliant points, so I just want to highlight for the audience that he argues that the common story that modernity marked by disenchantment of the world, where, like, you know, people, like, you know, got out of those beliefs of, like, any belief like connected to religion or just generally esoteric, they would say that the like, you know, we became more scientific and we got out of them, the West got out of it. But he says that itself is a myth. Far from banishing magic and spirits, the very scientists, philosophers, and social theorists who supposedly led the march of reason were deeply entangled with occult ideas and esoteric traditions. I'm paraphrasing the whole thesis of the book in some sense here. The narrative that we live in a purely rational, despiritualized modern age was never a historical reality, but rather a powerful cultural construction, often reinforced through colonial and Eurocentric frameworks. In truth, enchantment has persisted all along, sometimes hidden, sometimes openly revived, and the myth of disenchantment functioned less as a fact than a regurgitative ideal, shaping how societies understood themselves. And in this book, he is talking about one of the leading founding fathers in science having involvement with the occult, many examples, or having some, like, you know, time playing around with occultish beliefs, ideas, occult ideas. For example, Francis Bacon is a very good example. Isaac Newton is a good example.
Albert Einstein too.
Yeah. And that was like mind-boggling for me to come across that, you know, how I've seen the world, I think, and how people have, like, you know, been shown how we should see the world. I think that itself is problematic because, like, you know, what the kind of model that they provide of, like, you know, scientists and stuff like that, that itself can be put to question when we bring in these ideas.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. The you can see it. I don't say that it's everyone. I don't say all
Yeah.
politicians in the West are in these secret societies. No, I don't say that everyone in culture are in these secret societies, have esoteric thoughts, or all of the scientists and so on. But I say it's prevalent, and we can see it through history, and it's not part of conspiracy theory. It is something that you can see. You can just Google it up. It's something that has been mentioned in history books. Something when you study Western esotericism, you will see all of the names that you have mentioned. You mentioned Francis Bacon. You can mention Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton wrote more books about theology and about esoteric things. He was a Rosicrucian. Uh, then he wrote scientific books, and you can see that they were highly influenced by these things. Yeah.
Wow. That reminds me of another question I had for you. When we were talking about feminism, I had heard, now I don't know if that's correct or not, that the so feminism had waves, and the first wave of feminism, those who actually bought the first wave of feminism had some connection with the Theosophical Society, which itself is an esoteric or occultish group. Is that correct?
Yeah, like I mentioned, Helena Blavatsky, who's the founder of the Theosophical Society, and her magazine called Lucifer. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and some of them, some of the early first wave feminists, there are different waves, like you mentioned. You have the first feminists that were more for emancipation of women, that they could have the equal rights and the equal legal rights, have the right to vote, and so on. And then you had the uh, second wave of feminism, where they start to question more the structure of the family. And then you had the third, when they were talking about these things about gender and different genders and so on that they have today, the LGBTQI plus movement and so on. And then you have the fourth wave, which was after the Me Too movement and so on. So you have different waves, but the first wave, like you mentioned, they had some of their promoters had were from the Theosophical Society, and they were also uh, influenced by these esoteric thoughts.
Wow. And I mean that is something we should keep a very big note on. And I think another thing which we can tie this up with, which I think you mentioned, is that these kind of ideas, generally the kind of esoteric and occult ideas, uh I think you say this and many have said this, that sometimes they are seen to target women more and appeal to women more. So is that something that we see? And why is that the case? They are targeting women more. Why women more than men?
Uh, I would say yes and no. So when we talk about Freemasonry as an example, and many of the secret societies, they are only targeting men. So it's only for it's men's clubs, and women can't even join. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions people who are doing sorcery in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, "Min sharri naffathati fil uqad," those who glue into the knots. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Naffathat." Naffathat means women who are doing it. So the scholars mention, why is it mentioned that women are blowing in the knots? Said because it was more prevalent, that more women were indulged in sorcery and so on than men. But it doesn't mean that all of the magicians and those who were in the days of Fir'aun, they were men. And you can see the one who made sorcery against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Labid ibn Asim, was a man. So it's not all of them. But I think today, when we look at the neo-esoteric movements or the neo-pagan movements, we can see in New Age movements and so on, we can see that there's a lot of focus on reaching out to women. So most of those who are practicing these things, usually that are connected to New Age, there are usually more women than there are men that are attracted to these things. So yeah, that is something that you can see, but you shouldn't talk about that in general. Yeah, when it comes to esoteric thoughts in general, some things are more for men, some things are more for women.
Yeah. So yeah, that categorization, I think, was very important to highlight, because also what I see within, like, dealing with people generally, and also looking at, generally on aggregate levels, is that these kind of new pagan ideas and new spirituality ideas, women are appealed to those ideas more. But then these kind of atheistic, scientistic ideas, men are generally are driven more to these ideas. But both of them have a current, like both of them have connection with esoteric and occult kind of ideas in some sense, or societies or cultures in some sense. So in the end, both of these fitnas will have the same source in some sense. Would you agree?
Yeah. And, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf that when Allah Azza wa Jalla يعني من لعنة أو شيطان, that he has to leave Jannah, he swore an oath and he said that he will come to human beings in front of them, from the back, the left, the right, and so on. So shaitan, he comes to people from يعني from different sides. Men and women are alike in many ways, but they're not similar in other ways. So usually men are more inclined to reading these kind of logical books and scientific books and technical things that are usually related to things that you can touch on and so on. And women are more interested in relations usually. And there are different things that have been studied and so on, that men and women differ in things. It doesn't mean that all men are like this or all women are like that, but you can see that usually men are more inclined to these things, and usually women are more inclined to these things. So as an example, if you look at universities in countries that are famous for their feminism, as an example with Sweden, I know one brother, he was studying, I think it was like electrical engineering or something, and he said that there were 70 students in his class, with the whole in the whole course. I think it was 1 or 2 women, and the rest were men. And I know some sisters that have been studying to be like in nursery and so on, and 95% women. Yeah, and these are countries that have been promoting feminism for decades now. And you can see that men are more inclined to some things and women are more inclined to some things. So I remember when I made my research about Western scholars' refutations on atheism, I found a page on YouTube that put up all of the debates between atheists and Christians. There were about 300 debates that have been done. So you have like William Lane Craig and John Lennox and all these famous, and you have other people that are not that famous. I think I looked them through, all of them, and I saw in one of the debates of 300, I think, was one woman.
Wow.
So it was not that widespread. And I remember when I studied about the New Age movement, when I studied university in Sweden, I made a research about one of the magazines that they have. And they did not even talk to men. They were saying how you can become more spiritually fulfilled and be happy with your husband. Yeah, it's not even with your wife. Yeah, it's very much directed to women. So this is something you can even see in Muslim countries, that many of the women that are inclined to new spirituality, that new spirituality is usually kind of a mismatch. You take from different things. So you take something from Buddhism, something from Hinduism, something from Taoism, and then some of the esoteric thoughts that they have in the West and so on. And they make kind of a mismatch of all of these things, and they take what really suits them. It's all based on the kind of individualistic thoughts that we have in the West today, that no religious church or mosque should say, or imam should say to me that this is what you should believe in. I take something from here and something from there and so on. And you can also see that these thoughts have been influenced by the general capitalistic society. So usually in these new age movement, they are always trying to sell you something. And it's very important for them to sell you some crystal stones, or sell you this and sell you that and so on, because they are influenced by individualism and capitalism. So you can see that even though they take some elements from Hinduism or Taoism and Buddhism, it's not the same thing. It's not the same Hinduism as it is in India. It's not the same Buddhism as it is in India. They're westernizing it. And they are usually taking parts from the other kind of Western esoteric thought that they have, and they are putting it all together in a kind of a cocktail.
May Allah protect us from all of these fitna. And you know what I notice is that generally when we look at these atheistic ideas and these kind of feministic ideas, sorry, not feministic, but this kind of occult ideas, both have one thing in common, which is that they both are going to attack organized religion, they both are going to make the human being feel that there is no accountability. You like whatever, enjoy your life. Individualism is also a commonality between them. So in the end, like, they both are attacking Islam from different angles, but their goal or agenda seems very similar. Atheism and these kind of feministic occultist ideas.
Yes,
So may Allah protect us. Now, another very important question, I think, which we have to deal with here, is that when we talk about all of these isms, and how dangerous they are, how negatively they've impacted our ummah, one important ism also comes in, which is Zionism. Does Zionism itself have any connection with these kind of ideas and these cultures?
Yeah, this is a very broad topic and it's extremely interesting. So the Israelites, they were living in Palestine. They were living in the lands of Palestine today. And then when the second temple was destroyed, most of the Jews left Palestine. They left Jerusalem. They went to different countries and so on. And then they wrote down the Talmud. And in the Talmud, it's mentioned that Jews cannot return to Palestine. They cannot return to Palestine except when the Messiah come back, and they should not do it by force. So it's very clear. Because of that, Jews were not returning back to Palestine, but they were living in different countries. Some of them were living in the Muslim countries, later on when Islam became widespread, and some of them were living in Europe. And then there was a rabbi during the 17th century called Shabbatai Tzvi, who claimed to be the Messiah. Okay? He was living in the Ottoman Empire. And when he claimed to be the Messiah, he claimed also that they should return back to the land of Palestine, to the land of Israel that they mentioned. Then Shabbatai Tzvi, the Ottoman Empire went against him, and they forced him to convert to Islam. He had a big movement, and this sent shock waves. It was 1666. Yeah, it is 1666. And this sent shock waves in his movement and also to other places. And many of those who followed him, they also converted to Islam, but they kept the old traditions that they had. They were called damna in Turkey. And one of the things that they had in their movement was that you should not follow the halakha. You should not follow their sharia, their law. So you should even do sins, because this is a way to make the Messiah come back. Yeah, either the Messiah will come back when people are following him, or when there is wide corruption all around the world. Wow. So this movement was in the Ottoman Empire. And they say that many of these people that were kind of munafiqeen, they were later, they came into the organization called the Young Turks, who then later toppled the Ottoman Empire, and they promoted these kind of ideas. And they mentioned even that Ataturk and so on was part of this organization. I don't know exactly what is true and not true regarding that, but this is what has been mentioned. Many of them were part of the Young Turk movement. Was Ataturk or not? I haven't really studied the issue. But there was another person who took these ideas called Jakob Frank. He was living in Ukraine, but it was part of the Polish Empire. And he has had these very extreme ideas that you should be anti-halakha. Yani you should even get indulged in sexual orgies and everything that is like haram. Yeah, everything that is haram, you should do it. Okay? And he had a big clash with the rabbis during his day. They are saying you should follow the halakha, and he said no, you should not follow the halakha at all. So there's a famous Israeli historian called Gershom Scholem. Okay, he was the first professor in the Hebrew University in Jewish mysticism. And he got this thought about Frankists that they, after a while, they had a big movement. There were like 50,000 of them. And they had these esoteric thoughts that they were doing, they were divine sins. They were doing these sins as a way to get the Messiah back so they could go and the Messiah could come back in a way and so on. This was something that they should do. They converted, many of them, they converted to Christianity after that. So they were still indulged in these things. And many of them, like Scholem mentioned, get indulged in different esoteric societies like Freemasonry. And also, he is theorizing that they might have got indulged in the Bavarian Illuminati, okay? Because they were all in the same places. And the kind of thoughts that he came with led in one way or another, directly or indirectly, to what is called the Hasakala movement. The Hasakala movement was the Jewish Enlightenment, that they started to be more integrated in the societies that they lived, and they accepted many of these rationalistic thoughts and so on. But what Gershom Scholem mentions is that the Frankist movement had an impact on the Hasakala movement. And the Hasakala movement led in one way or another to take away the faith of the Jews from being a Jew. So being a Jew is a part of a nationality, just as you are like, I'm a Swede, this is my nationality. A person could have a nationality but does not have a country. So you have some nationalities today, they have their nationality, they have the language, they have the culture, but they don't have their own country. So during that period of time in Europe, there were many nationalities that did not have their own country. So you can say, as an example, the Serbs. The Serbs were living in the Ottoman Empire, but they were a nationalistic group and they wanted their own country based on their nationality. So now the Jews, because of the Hasakala movement, started to become more like an ethnic group more than it was a religion. And they did not care so much about what the Talmud said. Okay, so the Talmud says to you, don't go back to Palestine. Okay, but they're now a naturalistic group. We want, just as other people, they want their own country, we want our own country. And this is the basis of the Zionist movement, because the Zionist movement was a nationalistic movement and not a religious movement. So Theodor Herzl, who was the first political Zionist, or the one who was promoting political Zionism, he was an atheist. He did not believe in God. Okay, so he wanted the Jews to move to somewhere. They were not agree. They did not agree upon in the beginning where they should move. Should it be to Argentine? Should it be to Uganda? Where should it be? We don't know. Maybe the best place to get the Jews that are living in Europe today. Some of them are living in Poland, some of them in Russia, some of them living in the UK. How can we get all of these people to say, Yalla, let's go to Uganda, let's go to Argentina? It's like, nah, Habib, I like it here, you know. So the best way is to say, let's go to Palestine. Let's go to Palestine. And this was the main political thought. But among the Zionists, some of them were liberal, some of them were socialist, and like I mentioned before, some of the socialists, the early socialism had these kind of tendencies, and some of them were fascists. They had even close cooperations, or they looked up to the fascist movement in Italy and so on. And the leader of them was Zioia Botinsky. Okay, Zioia Botinsky, he is the founder of what's called Revanist Zionism, which is the ideology of the Likud party. So the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, he was working for Zioia Botinsky, okay, and he moved to the United States, and then Benjamin Netanyahu has all of these thoughts that he took from them and so on. But they were like different groups that they all came back to the thoughts of Theodor Herzl that they should have, and Theodor Herzl came back to the Hasakala, and Hasakala in one way or the other were influenced by the Frankist movement and so on. So there's a very interesting link here. But at the same time, there are also religious Jews. The religious Jews in the beginning, they were anti-Zionism, because they say it's said in the Talmud, we can't go back. So most of them were anti, and they did not really change their mind until after the Holocaust, after World War II, because they said, yeah, we can't stay here in Europe. They're killing us. We have to go there. So there were some religious Zionists before that, but now they started to spread that kind of ideology. So you can see that amongst the Jews, the Zionists today living in Israel, some of them are liberal, some of them are socialists, some of them are close to these fascist movements, and some of them are religious. And amongst the religious Jews, many of them are very much indulged in these esoteric things like Kabbalah and so on. So that's very widespread in Israel based on these kind of thoughts. So Zionism is in one way or another connected to these old esoteric movements, and we can see that that there are religious Jews today that are living in Israel that are also indulged in many of these esoteric things.
Wow. So that was like a long connection there, but yeah, there is a connection in some or the other way. And then that brings me to another important question. Can you briefly, also very briefly, if you can, explain what is Kabbalah and how is it connected?
Yeah, so Kabbalah is the esoteric side of Judaism. They say that this is part of their tradition since the days of Moses. Yeah, this is part of their oral tradition that has been with them since thousands of years back. But scholars in Kabbalah, they usually date it to kind of the 12th century Spain, that the esoteric thoughts were widespread. Just like I mentioned, they have translated different books to Arabic and so on. So these old kind of esoteric thoughts that were widespread during the Hellenistic era started to was promoted by some of the Jews, and it's usually Kabbalah is a very wide concept. There is a theoretical part where they are making kind of ta'wil of the Torah. So the Torah mentions something and they say, no, it means something totally different. So it's an esoteric interpretation of the Torah. Torah has a literal meaning that we're looking at right now. This is what it says. And then the rabbi will say, no, it does not mean that. It means something completely different. So they're kind of a batiniya, kind of Ismaili kind of interpretations. There's an open meaning and you have a hidden meaning. But there's also a practical side of Kabbalah, which is dealing with magic. So you can see that many of those who are practicing Kabbalah, they're also practicing magic. And that's why it's widespread. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he mentions the verse of about Harut or Marut, it goes back to the Jews in those days. So that magic was widespread amongst them from that day, from the days of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can see even the person who made sorcery against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Labid ibn Asam, he was a Jew. Does not mean that all Jews are for it. It's very clear in the Torah that you should not be indulged in the magic and so on. So if we say Judaism as a religion, you should not do it. But it's the same thing with many Muslims today. You can see that it's clearly forbidden with magic in Islam. We can see Muslims that are from different tariqas and so on. They're indulged in magic, and they say that this is karamat, karamat al-awliya and so on. So it does not mean that just because something is forbidden in a religion, that the practitioners of that religion will not be indulged in it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. And this brings me to a very important topic that we have to deal with, is actually addressing from an Islamic perspective how what these esoteric groups and occult groups contain, and how all of them are in some sense, just to clarify the Muslims that we seek protection from these things. Uh, so that clarification is important, and I think how to protect ourselves from this. I think if you can elaborate on both of these tangents.
Yeah, I think first of all, the most important thing is that we as Muslims have to learn more about our religion. And in our religion, in our faith, it's very clear that many of these things that the esoteric movements are dealing with are haram. Yeah, you have magic, you have astrology, you have divination, and all these kind of practices that are occult practices. They're all haram in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ talked about them. So it's very important that we understand the Islamic perspective, and then we also have the Islamic worldview of looking on the world, that we know that shaitan exists, because and that he really tries by himself, by his shayateen al-jinn, and by his shayateen al-ins in different ways, and the human shayateen and the jinn shayateen, to try to have an effect on people through these societies and through jinn and so on. And if we don't have that worldview, we will look at the world in a very narrow way, because if we only look at the reality, like I'm looking at my room now, looking at a specific part of the room, I don't see the whole reality. We will miss out a lot of things that is really happening in the. So if we only try to explain the different phenomena that we see around us with purely materialistic explanations, then we will miss a big part of the reality. As an example, if we only try to explain diseases, that people are sick with, or mental issues with purely materialistic explanations, then we will explain some of them, because there are some materialistic explanations for what happens inside of the body. So we have diseases, we have these kind of things that are happening, but we also have a spiritual side. So people can be sick because of magic, because of the evil eye, and so on. But if we only look at one part and we miss the other part, then we don't see the whole reality. And the same thing, if we only look at that everything that happens is because of magic or the evil eye, and we don't look at the other side, we'll miss that side. So the epistemology of the Muslims, that we try to look at the whole reality. Our way at looking at metaphysics is that we have alim al-ghaybi wa shahada. We have the hidden world and we have the open world, the world that we can see, that we can touch, and so on. But there's another world too. And the same thing, if we try to explain, we look at things that are happening right now in the world, and we only try to explain them by materialistic, political scientist kind of explanations, then we will grasp a part of the reality. So many of the things that are happening right now, okay, why is this politician here? Why this politician that? Why these kind of decisions that are taking, things that are happening right now in Gaza and other things, if we only try to explain them in materialistic way, based on, okay, this political party wants this and this, and we forget about shaitan, we forget about the secret societies, we forget about shayateen and jinn, and we will not understand the whole reality, what's happening, what's really going on. So it's very important to have a balanced way at looking at things. And like I said, we should not exaggerate in the other way. So we're only looking at things as big conspiracies, and it's everything that's happening is just because of secret societies and so on. No, there can be open politics too behind things, because there are different forces that are driving for things to happen at the same time. So I think that one of the most important things that we need is to reevaluate our worldview, our metaphysics, our look at the world, and our epistemology, how to gain knowledge about what is happening really in the world. And when we're doing that, it's very important that we also take these things in consideration and try to have a balanced outlook on the ways of looking at them.
Subhanallah, Subhanallah. That was a very good and important summary, I guess. So I think we'll have just maybe one last question and then we can end this discussion. I think there's a lot for our audience to take away. So one thing I wanted to also discuss is regarding when we talk about these occult occult groups or whatever occult cultures and esoteric groups, like do we have any very like a simple example of what kind of rituals do they have or what they do exactly? Like, can we have any idea, or we have no idea at all?
Yeah, if we can take the Frankists as an example, they were doing sexual rituals. Yeah, they were doing sexual orgies. So you had that, and it was the same thing with some of the occult societies. The occult societies during the 20th century too. I forgot his name now, but he was also into sexual magic.
Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, Aleister Crowley. Yeah, Aleister
Yeah,
Crowley. And he was actually one of the most influential people in Britain during the 20th century. He was a Freemason, but he was also had his own, own religion, Telema, and also the Golden Dawn and so on. So he had his own organizations. They were indulged in sexual rituals. But then you have other rituals, and as an example with Freemasons, taking as an example, in Sweden, became a big controversy in the 80s. I think it was in the main lodge in Sweden. They had something happen in the lodge, so they brought in electricians or people that were working with construction or something like that. And when they were working in construction, they saw inside of the lodge all of these skeletons and craniums, and it was packed with these things inside of the different rooms that they have and so on. So they smuggled in cameras, and they took pictures of these things inside of the lodges. And they gave it to a journalist. And this journalist started to make research about the Freemasons in Sweden and the rituals that they do. So they're lying down in a coffin, and they're going down in tunnels. And around the tunnels, they have all of these skeletons around them, and all these kind of very strange rituals that they are doing. So and they were researching, okay, who are the Freemasons in Sweden? So they saw all these politicians, high army officers, high people in the police, in the court, judges, all of these high people with high positions all around in the country, and also people in the church, actually, the Swedish church. So this became a big thing in Sweden, and they had about 25,000 members. And they actually dropped a lot of members because of that, because it became a taboo thing in Sweden to be a Freemason after that. But then it started to rise one more time after that. But it was quite interesting because they really talked about the rituals that they had, and it had an impact on the discussion in the society. But even though these rituals are secret today, yeah, and there are many books that you can read about what they are really doing in the rituals. But one of the things that they do is that they swear allegiance to the Grand Master, and and that they can never reveal anything. And they say in the oath that if they reveal anything, they will be killed, and they will be killed in a very brutal way too. When I had a discussion with Paul, I read the whole oath that they are saying. It's like they're gonna cut up my throat, they're gonna cut up my stomach, and I don't know. It's like a very bestialic kind of theatrical way that they are talking about these issues. But they're swearing these kind of oaths, and they inside the rituals they have many allusions to, like the temple of Solomon that was built, and Hiram Abaif, who was the main constructor. And this is also a very interesting thing to reflect upon when we look at it from an Islamic point of view, because we know that the Freemasons, many of the secret societies, they are obsessed with the Temple of Solomon and the one who built the Temple of Solomon. And we know, if we reflect upon the Quran, that when Solomon the Suleiman, when he built the temple, when he built the building there, he took benefit from who? From the jinn. The jinn,
Yes.
they helped him to build it. It's
Yes.
mentioned in the Quran. ومن الشياطين ما يغوصون له. They even used to dive for him and so
Hmm.
on. So it seems that this is what they are interested in, to get the kind of knowledge how to get connection in one way or another. I've been reflecting upon it. I don't have like very clear proofs to it, but they're obsessed with the building of Suleiman and the knowledge of Suleiman, and also the building of the pyramids. And they also have many allusions to Babylon and so on. So it seems that they are interested in the kind of powers that you get from dealing with the jinn in one way or another.
Oh.
That you can gain,
Yeah.
gain the power that you have and the structures that they were able to build and so on. You can get into other discussions about building the pyramids and these kind of things, but that's another discussion. But it's
Yeah.
quite interesting to see, because a lot of the old structures that you can see in the world were built in a way that it's very hard to understand how human beings could have done it by themselves. Yeah, and you can see that blocks weighing like tens of tons. Yeah, and some buildings that I read about was like hundreds of tons, and it's impossible for human beings to carry these things, even though there were many of them and they were doing it together and so on. So reflecting upon these things, that it might have to do something to do with the jinn that help them in different ways to build these kind of buildings. It could be something that could be reflected upon too. So it's important that we study these things from their sources, that we try to have as accurate knowledge as possible. That's one thing, to have facts. The other thing is to have reflections, that you reflect upon these things from an Islamic point of view. It does not mean that you say, this is a fact, this is what happened. So someone says, Abdullah as-Sueidi said that the jinn built the pyramids. No, I'm not saying it, but I'm saying you should reflect upon it, because we believe that the jinn, they are much stronger than human beings, and they have powers that we don't have. It's been mentioned with Mayman, with the jinn who brought the throne, in just a blink of an eye. So, and they have powers that we don't have, and they can build, they can do things. We know that from the Quran. And now when we see things in the world and we know that the jinn can do these kind of things, then we can reflect. We don't say it's facts, but we say that it maybe.
Yeah. And then there's one verse in the Quran, if I remember, Imran was alluding towards, which is that the jinns are called builders and divers in some sense.
Yeah.
So there is definitely, so there could be a connection there, and that's a very, very important point, actually. So one thing I wanna end the discussion with, when it comes to the youth, I think what we can equip them here is to actually study Islam, or to have this filter and understand that the whole world is influenced by these ideas. Like, for example, in this start of the discussion, you were mentioning about, for example, how much in the pop culture, in music, so much of making a pact with the devil and all of this is going on. I think there are other things that now the youth is going on, like for example anime and stuff like that, where same concept is going on, making pacts with the devil and stuff like that. And then there are very common beliefs within the youth, which is connected to new age spirituality, which has some connection with these things. You start believing in astaghfirullah, you ask the universe for something, affirmations and all of these kind of laws. Astaghfirullah, may Allah protect us. This all is a form of shirk, and it is completely forbidden in Islam. And many other things that the youth does not realize is that it is slowly, step by step, steps of the devil is taking them towards these ideas. The music, the anime, the kind of popular ideas, the popular books, everything is in some sense taking us towards those ideas. And at the same time, the other side of it, which is just the material exists, nothing else. and the whole concept of God becomes redundant in some sense. Astaghfirullah, like that is what they're trying to show, and that is also taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think we need to be mindful in both of these avenues, and I think you are the person who can maybe deal with this question, is that they are very enthusiastic about reading occult books and stuff like that. What do you have to say? What caution is there? What they have to do, and they like, they should not get into this subject, because I believe just reading that material itself can have a damaging impact on someone's spirituality. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. You should not read magic books. You should not. Learning about magic is a form of kufr. It has been mentioned in the verses in Surah Al-Baqarah. And also reading astrology and so on. It's a form of kufr. It can be kufr asghar and it can be kufr akbar in accordance to what you do. So this is very, very dangerous. So there's a difference between reading about something and reading the thing itself. So reading about what the scholars have mentioned, Muslim scholars or Western scholars that have been studying these issues, about the history of esoteric movements and so on, it's nothing wrong to read about that. This is reading history. It's reading to understand the impact of the society and so on. There's a difference between that and reading magical books. Yeah, how to do magic, how to get in contact with the shayateen and so on. So the first thing is allowed, and the second thing is it's not allowed.
Yeah, so I think that distinction was important, because I did not wanted, the audience to misunderstand something and, they were like, oh yeah, so the brother Abdullah is saying that you read magic books and they start reading. Like, no, that's that's not what we are saying. Yeah, yeah. Jazakallah khair. And I really enjoyed this discussion. I think there's a lot to take for our audience. And I'm really grateful that you gave me this opportunity and accepted the invitation. May Allah bless you immensely. And I would look forward to have more opportunities to speak to you, inshallah.
And I just wanted to mention that I tried to make things as simple as possible, but each thing that I was talking about, you can talk about it like an hour by itself. Like talking about Zionism, I tried to talk about it for 5 minutes. Zionism and the occult and all these things, that's an hour itself. Talking about other subjects, socialism and the occult and the history and the impact today, everything is like books by themselves. So I tried to make it as simple as possible. If it was correct, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if it was wrong, yeah, it's from me or from shaitan. So try to do our best to make it as easy as possible so people can understand these things. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us all. Barakallahu fiqh for inviting me.
Ameen. Ameen. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.